And so our first question, has anybody read the state constitution, Article 8, Section 3, what happened to the lottery, money for the schools? Have you thought about getting out of the state law firm for the school fight?
Before I begin, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Leslie Love, and I'm a state representative from the west side of the city, representing District 10. And I want to say thank you to the Honorable Councilman Scott Benson. Thank you for turning that mic up. Who invited me to participate on this panel. Thank you to Principal Brown. Thank you to the teachers who came out this evening. And I want to thank the parents, most of all, who are here, and the students. So give yourself a round of applause. I really appreciate that. I can't directly answer the question about the lottery money and how that is spent. I remember when I put together last year's budget to send out to constituents, and when it's present right in front of me, how that breaks down. But I also want you all to know that this issue, and thank you to Ms. Harris for your presentation. You are absolutely on point with what you have presented here. It is my colleagues and I, Senator Johnson, the other representatives for the city of Detroit, we are in this fight with you. We fought it when it was becoming a law or trying to turn into law. We were there in the rooms at the tables meeting with teachers and students and educators and union members and everyone who's invested in our children's future. But this, just today, I have in my district, and I have to say this to you so you can understand the context that I'm coming from. 3 schools in my district that are on this list. One is a public school, one is an EAA school, and one is a charter school. They're all suffering. They all need help and resources. It's not just one particular group, whether it's DPS traditional or EAA or charter. We have a problem with education in the city of Detroit. And I was sitting in my office today with the Treasurer's Department talking about why they're closing one of the schools in my district, that the charter was pulled. And I have a stack of 10 packs of paper from students who wrote me letters saying, Representative Love, please don't close our school. And some of the letters were so poorly written, it broke my heart. So we absolutely have a problem, and we need to start working to address those issues. And if there is ever any real genocide, the new genocide that is happening in our communities, the real genocide is the lack of education. And if we do not educate ourselves and our young people, it is the way we will die. We cannot have a functionally illiterate city, citizenry. And so what are we doing in the State House? We've met with the State School Reform Office. We are drafting letters and making movements and planning and strategizing of how we can at least delay, if this is going to happen, the school closings. You can't just, if they close, I'm on the west side. If they close the schools that are on that list, the only school we have left open is Renaissance. There was a time, and I know, and I can look out in this audience, where I walked to all my schools, elementary school, middle school, and high school, walked to Cooley High, and it felt like it was a 5-mile walk there and back. So I understand how important it is to have community-based schools that are quality schools educating our children. And so we are working, thank you, we are working on this. Don't think that our legislators, we're sitting back with our hands tied, but do understand that there's a law in place. We are the minority, but we don't just go, oh, we can't, we're the minority. It's true, there are real barriers here. But we are still going to try to do all that we can and challenge this the way it was communicated out to parents, schools, superintendents. So, and this is just like it's new to us. We are at the beginning of this process, and we're definitely trying to strategize and moving forward and trying to help keep our schools open, keep students local. And go on and on. But the question was about the lottery. And I think I answered with I don't have that information yet. But maybe, I don't know if Senator Johnson, you want to add anything to that, if that's forward in your head.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. I hate that we're meeting on these issues, but it's good to see Pershing alive. On the subject of the lottery, I've been around the legislature long enough to have sort of figured out some of the answers that we've been asking for a long time. The lottery money gets spent the way it's supposed to get spent. The problem with the way the lottery money is spent is that it's not spent according to the proportionality of it coming in. So there's a ton of money that comes into from Detroit to support the Michigan Lottery. If it came back the same way it comes in, Detroit schools would be in a little bit better shape. But I don't want any of us to leave here and believe that any of this is happening in a vacuum. I don't want you to believe that the school system situation, the scenario, is separate and distinct from the larger construct that the city of Detroit is facing, the larger problem. You got to take this in context. If your intent, if the corporatist intent, if the people who don't think like us, if their intention is to take housing stock or take over communities, the first thing you do is you destroy a school system. Because school systems are centers of economic development. And the community builds around a school system. Mothers move into communities because they have solid school systems. And you can't convince mommies to move in with their families if you don't. If you ask me, the time for these meetings has kind of come and gone. These are great conversations. But we're all going to leave here tonight. We'll be frustrated. We'll go home, we'll have dinner, and then we'll talk maybe tomorrow and perhaps the next day about the meeting we were at a couple nights ago and why it was so important. But we really won't have a strategy. As it relates to what I think we should do coming away from here, the time for talk is kind of come and gone. So, the same way, and I don't want to preach, I'm very emotional about this issue, but I do want to say that the same way we have been able to, in our past, stop corporatists in their tracks, we got to do the same thing today. So, if you're going to have a march, if you're going to bring people to Lansing, or if you're going to put them in a governor's office, or if you're going to occupy some of these offices, there's got to be a training and a strategy that supports that. And there's got to be a group that can go in based on the pressure mounted that people like me don't want to have mounted against them to then negotiate what the new outcome is going to be. We're not going to have this conversation in Grosse Pointe or Birmingham or West Bloomfield, not because they wouldn't do it simply because they're white, but mostly because they wouldn't allow it because they believe that their money is worth something when it comes to negotiating with a capitalistic government. Let me say this in English. It makes no sense for us to collect ourselves around the issue and march on somebody if we don't send a tactical team in to negotiate the thing that we're looking for. So if you're tired of your community looking the way it looks, because politicians are putting on policies or not putting in place policies that decimate the community, then the time is now to put together a TAC team to go get back some of what we need. And I got news for you. We can't send in some of the actors who've been going in to make these conversations go because those people are bought and paid for. How many of you know that when you go down to DTE, when you hear that people are marching on DTE, how many of you know that those people who are marching are usually on DTE's payroll? See, so there's an effort to hide all of this stuff from the community, to feign or make you think that certain things are going on, but they're not. So I'll tell you, if you have a school that's not representing your children the appropriate way and educating them wrong, if they're doing the wrong thing by your kids, don't send them to the school. Okay, maybe that don't resonate with people. If they're not going to do the right things to your kids, you don't send them into that place. That's just not what we should do. You do the thing that you can. Let me tell you what you do. And we've gotten really soft in our community, because this is the 50th anniversary of the rebellion that took control of Detroit. And today, I'm not sure what would start a rebellion into Detroit. It's not the killing of a kid. It's not snatching a woman off a street. It's not murdering an elderly woman in her community who's taken care of it for years. I'm not sure what would cause a rebellion in Detroit today. So my point is, I've got school-age children. And when I'm thinking about their future, I'm not going to send them somewhere that doesn't work. If I got to quit being a legislator and homeschool my kids or get with other parents who are like-minded, that's what I will do. I've got kids I hear you. Listen. You're not hearing. Okay, let me put it plainly. You're a teacher. Let me put it very plainly. The people we're getting ready to go to Lansing to ask to do the right thing, they've never cared about poor kids. They've never cared about black kids. We live in a country that is built and founded on racism. You're not going to negotiate with that. So in order to save these schools, the community has got to get irate about it. And not legislators, parents. Nobody's kicking in doors today. We don't listen to the people at the bottom who can help us the most. The people at the top, PhDs aren't going to get this done because they got a $100,000 car note. They got a $400,000 house. They got kids in college they're paying for. People who can't risk something ain't going to go get the answer for you. So the answer is to empower the people at the bottom, the parents. No matter what we think their educational circumstance is, in every room that any of us go into to talk to these folks, parents are never there. Children are never there. The teachers are sometimes there, but traditionally, they don't negotiate on behalf of the teachers. So there are people coming to take over our community. And if you think what's happened in the last year is bad, it's getting ready to get markedly worse. There's a lady named Betsy DeVos who's getting ready to try to gentrify this entire system. Give DPS 18 months. So what's my point? I'm trying to get people to understand. I know we got a ton of questions, and I'm quit after this. I'm trying to get people to understand you got to be radical about this. And you got to force yourself on this government because this government is forcing itself on you.
Thank you, Senator Burt Johnson. And just so you know who we have here at the table, we have from my left, we have Dr. Iris Taylor, President of the Detroit School Board. We have Ms. Sonia Mays, School Board member. We have Ms. Veronica Conforme, EAA Chancellor. We have Representative Leslie Love. And we have Superintendent of Detroit Public Schools Community District, Alicia Merriweather. All right, so here's our next question. Does anyone know when a final decision will be made on the school closings? What's the timeline?
I will just share that the letter that was sent to families and to the district stated that a decision would be made by the end of February, the beginning of March. But I will also share that the school board at their special meeting last night made a very important decision. So I'd like to pass this to Dr. Taylor to share with the community the decision that was made at last night's meeting.
Good evening. It is clear that the Detroit Public Schools Community Districts Board's position is that we should not close these schools and that we should have the opportunity to look at where improvement is necessary and if anything differently should occur with any of our schools, that we take the decision, make the decision about what should happen, that it should not be an SRO decision. Clearly, we have deficits in these schools, and we have to address those deficiencies. It is also the board's position that the SRO and its implementation does not follow the intent of the legislation. And so to that extent, we have also retained legal counsel to prepare an injunction around this decision. It is our intent to continue to work with the governor's office to come to see if we can come to a resolution. But if we're not successful in that perspective, we just wanted to be sure we had the options available. And the timeline is sort of a moving target at this point.
I just wanted to add, this is a multi-pronged approach. So one will be through legal action. Another will be through resistance on legislators' part and how we try to push back and delay. Maybe it's through legislation or our own way that we do advocacy. But the third way to add to Senator Johnson's comments is that the parents really need to show up in Lansing. So at the end of last year, there was conversation about cutting the pensions of our emergency responders. And we had a lot of firefighters, EMS workers, and police officers show up and walk around the Capitol. They had lined the walkway that the legislators normally take to get into the Capitol. And I'm telling you, that got killed in lame duck. They shut it down because they showed up and they were not playing. They were very serious. And so we need that training that you were talking about, Ms. Harris, that to happen, and that parents show up. You matter, your presence matter. When you start to teachers and parents writing letters and making phone calls and blowing up the phones, people get nervous about that. And you need to make sure you do that with the Republicans who are running this legislature.
Does the Reform Board have the data that suggests keeping Pershing open?
I'll take that question. And good evening, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the Pershing staff. Shirley Brown, our wonderful principal. Is she in the house? Let's give her a round of applause. What has gone on in Pershing for the last couple of years has been amazing. We have staff members, we have parents, we have alumni who are engaged again in the success of Pershing and the wonderful legacy it has. And she has done everything to turn around this building, and the results are showing. Improved attendance, drop in suspension rates, improved test scores. The way the SRO is looking at this data is completely wrong. And we are opposed and will be fighting the closure of Pershing, as with all of our schools that are on the list. Unequivocally, there has been progress made in all the schools. Is there more work to do? Absolutely. There is more work to do. There is more work to do collectively with the community, with our parents, with our students. But we have made significant progress, especially here at Pershing that is hosting tonight. So I wanted to acknowledge that first. They are looking at this from one lens only, and they are not looking at it holistically. They're not looking at all of the where students start and how much they're growing. They are looking at it from one perspective, creating a list and pretending like that is all the information they need. They haven't even been to our schools to make those types of decisions. So we don't believe that they have accurate information. We believe that we need a better accountability system that includes the perspective of teachers and parents in order to rate schools.
Thank you. Question: what is the school system doing to ensure quality education to all the school-age children, even the children in special education and those with disabilities?
So really that's the key question that should be driving conversation, not about closing schools, but what are we doing to make schools better? And I think as we look at this larger issue, the question should be put to every educational institution in the city: what are you doing to make education better for students, for staff, for the community? And the answer is every school really needs different things. And there's an issue around equity, and there's an issue around stability. So stability, first of all, closing schools doesn't improve them. So when you close a school, it will never, ever get better, number one. Number two, the number of children who are going to be displaced and have to travel further distances will make life very, very difficult. You're talking about safe routes to school. You're talking about walking by abandoned buildings. You're talking about students who have no access to transportation, having to walk long distances. All of that is unacceptable. What we need to be talking about is how do we make sure that every single school is moving towards improvement. And you have to look at the individual needs of that school. You have to look at creative and innovative ways to address the deficiencies that exist in that school. And some ideas that we've looked at in Detroit Public Schools Community District include the following. So first of all, looking at potential partnerships with universities, looking at teachers being built up as professional development is given to help them get training in literacy, address the vacancy issue in our schools. And I have to say this, you cannot fill vacancies by offering salaries that are not competitive. We need highly qualified, the best qualified. I want to point out from the presentation earlier, although the law allows only Detroit to hire uncertified teachers, we have said from the beginning that that is not good for Detroit schools, and it's not good for Detroit students. So I want to be really clear, because even though a special law was written just for Detroit, we are not supporting that law. We need the best qualified teachers paid correctly to invest in our students. So there are many, many different things. High quality teachers is one of the strategies. But to get high quality teachers, you have to pay them. And we need the best teachers at our most struggling schools. A couple of other things just to consider around literacy. Every single teacher really should have additional training in how to teach students how to read. And there's a difference between learning to read and then reading to learn. And you cannot read to learn until you learn to read. And no matter where you're starting with, you have to be able to help students learn how to read. And so that is a major component of really improving education across the board, is making sure teachers have that training around teaching others how to read. Just for everyone's information, most people like myself, who became a teacher over 20 years ago, we only had to take one class in reading. I taught middle school science over here at Farwell, which is now Mason. All of my students pretty much came to Pershing, and so Pershing has a special spot for me because most of my students attended here. But I will tell you, as a middle school science teacher, I only had one class in teaching how to read or reading strategies. That's not enough. And to be clear, reading to children is very different than teaching them how to read. Children need to be read to, but they also need to be taught how to read. And that's a specific strategy. You have to invest in teachers so they have that skill. I could go on and on about different things that we're going to do and that we are doing, but the bottom line is this conversation cannot die. I appreciate really the passion that you spoke with to say, what are we going to rise up about? If we do not stand up for children and having equitable access to high quality education, not just buildings that are open, high quality educational opportunities, that's what we need to stand on. And I can tell you that the team at DPSCD and the board are behind that 100%. We have to find solutions. The solution is not to close buildings. The solution is to make schools better. And we need to come together and find solutions, not just for Pershing, but for all of the schools that are on that list. All of the schools in this entire state, we need to find solutions.
Question: do we really believe the threat to close all these schools is realistically going to happen? Anybody want that one? You want to say? All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Mays, and I'm one of the newly elected school board members. That question seems like it should have a straightforward answer, but it actually is a slightly more complicated question than it appears. So when the 7 of us were elected this past November on this new board, it was our understanding that the intent of the legislation that was passed last summer that created the Detroit Public Schools Community District, it was our expectation and our understanding that that was a fresh start, that was a fresh start financially, that it was a fresh start operationally, and of course that it was a return to local control. And I believe that each of the 7 of us would say that we entered into this process with the expectation that that was legitimately what was being created. And I'll say there was always this open question about whether the legislation that was done last summer, whether that restarted this SSRO clock or not. And the transition manager, Judge Rhodes, who preceded us, actually did a lot of work, very public work actually, trying to get to the answer to that question. When we started on January 1st, again, this board's expectation was that whatever the clock was that controls the SSRO school process, that would start from day 0 because it is a new district. And of course, that's not what has happened. To it, I won't go as far as to say that we were caught off guard by the actions of the SSRO. You know, you do this work a little bit, you learn who you can and cannot trust, and so I can't say that, you know, we were caught off guard, but I do think that it's pretty clear that what is going on with the SSRO flies directly in the face of what we believe was the intent last summer. And so I don't come to this work with a history of being in politics. I don't necessarily have the language of it. I come to this work as a problem solver, and I come to this work as someone who's a graduate of DPS who cares very, very deeply about the sustainability of our school system here. And so there are actually 2 fights that are going on right now. The first fight is to answer the question of whether or not we have a true and legitimate clean start in this district. Do we have the ability to run the district without state interference, without state oversight, without state meddling, and do the things that we know need to be done to strengthen our schools, to support our teachers, to rebuild our communities on our term? That is the big fight, and we have to answer that question. And that is why the board yesterday took the step of saying, we're gonna go out and get a law firm. We're not gonna go out and get a single practitioner law firm who has 1 person working in their firm. We went out and we got a high-powered law firm that speaks the language of Lansing, that speaks the language of the governor's office, that stands as a peer to all these decision makers that we have to go and fight this fight against. And we made that decision last night because it is without hesitation absolutely critical to the future of this district that we understand what Clean Start means. So that's the first fight. The second fight, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give such a long answer to the question, but the second fight, the law firm is Miller Canfield, and they're a Detroit-based firm. The second fight, which has to be waged simultaneously to that first, you know, sort of, right now it's that first fight is tracking to be a litigation, a court fight. But the second fight is the fight that I think everyone in this room is directly engaged in. And that's the fight that has to collectively, and we have to attack this in all sorts of ways. We need our partners in Lansing. We need our partners at the city government. I see Mayor Duggan, his chief of staff is here supporting us tonight. And that's the fight that says, in the next 3 weeks, it has to be made crystal clear to Natasha Baker and everyone that's a decision maker around the SSRO that these are our schools, they are anchors in our community, and you're not gonna shut them without a plan. And we have a plan. So this board's intent is not just to fight with empty words, but to actually develop a countervailing plan of action that resolves the issues that are being flagged at these schools. So, as you're asking yourself, what's happening? How can I play a role? What do I need to do? It just depends on how you like to get engaged. So maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a letter, or maybe it's just showing up at stuff like this, so that over time, there we go. I think I heard City Council. Pick your poison. It all actually matters, though. So, can I didn't. I know. I just don't like to. I didn't do anything to be interrupted. So, are you done? Were you done? Okay.
All right, thank you. So our next question is going to be, does the board have a strategic plan for parent engagement and mobilization? Does the board have a strategic plan for parent engagement and mobilization?
I tried to touch on a little bit of that in my previous answer. We are. That's okay. I'm not going to talk over you.
Okay. Yep. So we're still developing a plan for the strategic plan of engagement for the mobilization. And this was another question. What was the result of the meeting that was held at noon today reviewing the law governing school closures? I'm understanding there may have been a Senate meeting today? Okay. What is the plan of action to result in keeping the school? What is the best plan of action for the result that we want, which is to keep our schools open?
So I think, as has already been stated, there's several ways to approach this. So first of all, there's the legal battle, and then the second thing is community engagement. I think the other things to think about are really the larger question about how do we improve schools, which can also involve community engagement. So I think there's multiple ways. What's the best plan of action? The plan that results in not closing schools, which right now we don't know what angle that is. So however you can get involved, get involved.
Thank you. Did DPS address the parents regarding the potential closing after the Lansing letter was sent to the households? Did DPS address the parents after the letter from Lansing was sent to the households?
So I do need it to be clear that the district did not have a heads up that those letters would be sent to families. So I think it's important for the community to know that those letters were sent directly to families without notifying the district. But as soon as we knew about the letters, we did send communication home to parents through a letter and also a robocall, and each of the 16 schools have held meetings with their families and their students, at least for DPSCD. EAA, I'll turn over to Chancellor Conforme.
We sent letters out as soon as the list came out to all our family members, and we have held meetings at every EAA school to talk about the implications of the letters and how we're going to respond, both to the state and how we're going to mobilize action.
All right. Does the board intend to sue for financial damages for the amount of debt that the state incurred during the takeover? Does the board intend to sue for financial damages for the amount of debt that the state incurred during its takeover?
As a newly elected board, we are prioritizing where we need to put our resources and what we need to attend to first. And at this point in strategy, as we build our strategic plan, we're addressing the conditions around the closures by SSRO. And that's where we're starting. So at this point, that's got to be our major focus and our energy.
Here's a question I believe was answered by Miller Canfield. Who is on the litigation team to lead the legal battle, and have you asked Judge Greg Mathis?
Last night, this board voted unanimously to engage a Detroit-based firm, Miller Canfield, to when we're ready to lead the litigation work. I'm not sure that Judge Mathis would be the right person to lead the litigation. Although I would love to actually have him as the judge on this, because then I feel comfortable that it would go in our way.
All right. Students and parents who attend EAA schools are fighting two battles. Number one is to keep their schools open. Number two is to keep the staff that is currently working in the schools. Is anyone considering the students? A lot of students come from unstable homes. They look at their schools and teachers as a place of stability. Is anyone taking this into consideration?
So the DPSCD leadership has been meeting with the EAA leadership since about October to talk about the transition of the EAA schools back to DPSCD. And the conversation around staffing and administration and the schools has been part of that conversation, understanding stability in communities and in neighborhoods. It does need to be noted that all of those conversations have to be involving the union and have to have consideration around CBA or collective bargaining agreements that are in place. So we don't want to violate any agreements that have been made, but we are very keenly aware that part of what makes a school great are the connections that teachers have with students and families. So I do want to acknowledge that has been part of the conversation. It is not yet resolved, but do know that that has been part of the conversation as we talk about the reintegration of the EAA to Detroit Public Schools Community District. It is a very, very serious question, and I appreciate it.
Question. Is it our children can't learn, or teachers can't teach, or funding? What's the problem?
We're gonna tag team on this. There was a report that was recently released that proved that some of our best performing schools, their foundation allowance is about $8,600 per pupil. And in the city of Detroit, our per pupil funding is about $7,500 to about $8,200. So we are underfunding. So we know part of the problem is underfunding our students in the state of Michigan by, at least in the city of Detroit, by nearly $1,200. So part of the problem is that we are not really investing in education the way we should as a state.
Well, I was just going to start the statement with, it is most certainly not that anything about children and their ability to learn. So let's start setting the record straight there that all children can learn. So I want to be really clear to address that question, and I don't want to let that question go unanswered. Our children are completely capable of anything. And as I said earlier, I taught middle school just a mile away at Farwell for 12 years, over thousands of kids that came through. And the things that we were able to do and the things that my students have been able to accomplish go the whole gamut. I've seen everything that you can see in terms of the whole range of students' abilities when they come in and as they grow and what they can do. And so I want to just set the record straight. It's not the kids. There are some issues with funding. We need to make sure that places are adequately resourced. When we look at issues of equity, so equity means giving people what they need, not giving everyone the same thing. So when we look at situations in education, there are issues of inequity. So you cannot give the same thing to everyone because everyone needs different things. So to the point of funding, that's one kind of support. Community support, teacher training, family support, all of those kinds of things. Wraparound services, they need to be distributed equitably. So giving people what they need, not the same thing to everybody. And that includes adults and kids that are connected with schools. I don't know if anyone else down the table wanted to answer that question or address it. No? Okay.
All right, thank you. We have the clergy here. What role can the church help in community schools where the churches exist? What role can the churches play to help our community schools where the churches exist?
There's a saying that it takes a village. So I think that the churches can be galvanized to support the schools, to get integrated into the schools' programming so that they can support internally what happens in schools, that they can support what happens in the immediate community around schools, that the area stays safe, that, you know, that there is a comfortable way that kids can get to school. If there's any participation in wraparound services that they could engage in, is another way of engaging and supporting the school process.
I'll add one thing. Every time we've had a tragedy in a school, Henry Ford, a student passing away, a parent passing away at Mumford, it has always been the clergy who always extend themselves, come to the school, comfort parents, and comfort students. I want to acknowledge that and thank that. I think that is the basis of the partnership. These are students that also attend your churches, and we collectively have a responsibility for them.
Thank you to all the clergy in the audience and the work that you do. I noticed that a lot of churches have, it's a sign outside your church. I think it's eat here or lunch or something. You provide meet up and eat up. Those services. That's a really great program. The amount of young people who come to school hungry. I'm a former educator and spent 12 years as a professor at Mary Grove College before coming to the legislature. And so being a part of that program is helpful. Offering the one thing that's always the first thing to get cut from schools are those extracurricular activities, the music, the dance, the poetry, the band class, the choir, all of those things that are resources that you can have right there in church. So if it's after school, but right before mom and dad come home, you can come to the church, and we're gonna have choir practice. We're gonna let some of the kids get on the instruments and learn how to play an instrument, because that may not be offered at the school. Or maybe there's an opportunity to do some physical fitness. We definitely need to get off the computers and go and take a walk or do some meditation or just peaceful being and being still in your place, or have counseling service, because mental illness is rampant in our communities. Some people don't believe in going to therapists and psychologists, but they'll speak to a pastor. So being available and allowing yourself, to have a safe place to come and have those conversations. And I think a lot of the pastors in our community are doing that, and I thank you for that. And if you're not, that's some of the ways you can help.
All right, thank you. Just want to acknowledge that City Council President Brenda Jones has come in. Thank you for coming out this evening, Council President. Schools need help and resources. How can the community help to get these type of resources? Block clubs, churches, social organizations. How can we help to raise some of the additional revenues and resources that these kids need and the schools need to fill the gap?
I think one of the first steps is to actually talk with the school about what would be most helpful. And there's a saying that we've been using with our partners that come to DPSCD, and it says, "Do nothing about me without me." So in other words, when you're trying to make a plan to help, it's most helpful to make a plan with the people who are going to be impacted. So the first step I would say is to actually go to the school and ask what would be helpful, and then work out a plan about how to provide that. Because sometimes when people are trying to help, if it's not actually what you need, it's not helpful, even though there's good intents. So I think to go to the school, have a conversation about what would be most helpful, and then go about a plan about how to provide those things is the way that I've seen really work well at a lot of our schools who have strong community partners.
So now, that's going to bring us to a close.